She told everyone I was just temporary in her life and nothing serious. I proved her right by leaving completely. Months later, she was still stuck thinking about me while I had already moved on without looking back. He's not serious, okay? He's just someone I'm passing time with. I heard it clearly. Every single word. She didn't know I was standing 6 feet behind her, around the corner of the hallway, holding 2 cups of coffee I'd just made for both of us. And I didn't say a word. I just stood there, coffee in both hands, listening to the woman I had genuinely started to fall for explain to her friends that I was basically a placeholder. I didn't drop the cups. I didn't walk away immediately. I just stood there long enough to hear her laugh at something one of her friends said in response. And that laugh, that easy, unbothered laugh, told me everything I needed to know about how little weight my presence carried in her life. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. What I almost lost wasn't just her. It was the version of myself I had quietly started becoming around her. The version that showed up without being asked. The version that remembered small things. The version that was slowly, stupidly, beautifully starting to trust someone again after years of keeping his walls up. That version almost disappeared completely. Not because she broke me, but because I almost let her reduce me. Something irreversible was already building in the back of my mind from that moment. I just hadn't let myself admit it yet. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I was 29 at the time. Brooke and I had been seeing each other for about 4.5 months. No label, but consistent. Same city, same routines, same bed most weekends. We met at a mutual friend's birthday gathering in October. She walked in wearing a dark green jacket, talking loudly about something that made the whole table turn toward her, and within 20 minutes, she'd somehow ended up sitting next to me. We talked until the place started closing. She texted me first the next morning. That's how it started. For the first 2 months, everything felt easy. We cooked dinner at her place on Thursdays. We'd drive out to the edge of the city on weekends when neither of us had plans. She had this habit of sending voice notes instead of texts when she was tired. I liked that. It felt like her real self, unfiltered, half asleep and rambling about whatever she'd eaten or watched or thought about that day. I started looking forward to those voice notes more than I should have. Around month 3, something shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way I could point to. Just a quiet, creeping feeling that I was more invested in this than she was. She started being a little slower to respond. Plans would get canceled with half an explanation. She'd be physically present, but somewhere else in her head. I told myself it was just life. Work stress. Routine lulls. The natural dip that happens in any connection once the new energy settles. I ignored the part of me that noticed she never once called this anything. Never referred to me as her boyfriend. Never introduced me as anything specific when we ran into people she knew. Always just my name. Just my name, standing there next to her with no title attached. I told myself that was fine. That labels didn't matter. That what we had felt real, and real things didn't need to be labeled to exist. I was wrong. Not about what felt real, but about the fact that 2 people can experience the exact same situation in completely different ways. And what felt like the beginning of something to me was, apparently, just a comfortable detour for her. The day I heard her say those words, it was a Saturday afternoon in late February. We'd been at her apartment since the night before. Her 2 closest friends, Petra and Simone, had come over for brunch around 11. I liked them fine. Petra was sharp and funny, always had something dry to say. Simone was quieter, more observant, the kind of person who noticed things people didn't expect her to notice. We'd all eaten together, finished a whole pot of coffee, and the conversation had been easy. Nothing uncomfortable. No tension. Around 1 in the afternoon, Brooke went to the kitchen to start on the dishes while her friend sat in the living room. I offered to help and she waved me off, so I went to the bathroom down the hallway. On my way back, I could hear them talking. Their voices carrying just enough. Not shouting, but not whispering either. The kind of volume people use when they assume no one's listening. Petra was asking something I didn't fully catch. Then I heard Brooke's voice clearly. He's not serious, okay? He's just someone I'm passing time with. My feet stopped. My hands tightened around the coffee cups I'd picked up off the counter on my way back. And I stood there. Still, there was a beat of silence. Then Simone said something quiet that I couldn't hear. Then Petra said, "Oh, okay. So you're not actually feeling it." And Brooke said, "I mean, he's fine. He's sweet. But it's not going anywhere. You know how it is." Petra laughed. Brooke laughed too. That easy, unbothered laugh I mentioned. Like the whole thing was as light as picking a flavor of coffee. Like I was just a flavor she'd chosen temporarily. Like she'd swap me out when something else caught her eye. I waited until they moved on to a different topic. Then I walked back into the kitchen, handed her the coffee, said something normal, smiled like I hadn't heard a word. And for the rest of that afternoon, I sat in that apartment being exactly what she'd described. Sweet, present, completely unbothered on the surface, and absolutely wrecked underneath. Her friends left around 4. We watched half a movie after. She fell asleep on the couch before it ended. I sat there with the remote in my hand, watching the screen and not seeing anything on it, just running the conversation over and over in my head. He's not serious, just someone I'm passing time with. It's not going anywhere. I replayed every moment from the last 4.5 months through that lens. Every Thursday dinner, every late drive, every voice note, and suddenly none of it looked the same. What I'd read as growing closeness, she'd been experiencing as casual comfort. What I'd been quietly building, she'd been quietly tolerating. The worst part wasn't even the words themselves. The worst part was how casually she'd said them. No conflict in her voice. No guilt. No hesitation. Just a plain, easy statement of fact. Like it wasn't even worth stressing about. Because I wasn't. I looked at her sleeping on that couch. Her hair slightly messy. One hand tucked under her cheek. She looked completely peaceful. And I thought, she doesn't even know she said anything. She's not losing sleep over this. She never was. I was the only one here who thought this was real. I picked up my jacket quietly, left a note on the kitchen counter that said I had an early morning, walked out of her apartment, and drove home in total silence. No music, no podcast, just me, the road, and the very slow process of swallowing something I didn't want to swallow. I want to be honest about what happened next. I didn't do the dramatic thing immediately. I didn't ghost her. I didn't send a long message. I didn't call her out. I did something that, looking back, was probably worse for me in the short run and better for me in the long run. I gave it one more week. Not to test her. Not to see if she'd somehow sense what was wrong. I gave it one more week because I genuinely wanted to be fair. I wanted to see whether this was a throwaway comment she made to manage her friends' expectations or whether it was actually how she thought about me. So I watched. And what I saw in that final week answered my question completely. On Monday, she texted me the way she always did. Casual. Easy. Nothing out of the ordinary. On Tuesday, I suggested we grab dinner, and she said she was tired and maybe later in the week. On Wednesday, she posted a photo with Petra and Simone from some wine bar. Didn't mention she'd been tired. On Thursday, our usual dinner night, she said she had to catch up on some work stuff and would let me know when she was free. On Friday, she texted me a meme with no context. Just a meme. Like we were acquaintances. And somewhere around Friday evening, something in me quietly made a decision. No drama. No confrontation. No moment where I sat her down and said, we need to talk. I just decided. She was right. This wasn't serious. So I was going to stop treating it like it was. The following week, I pulled back. Not abruptly. Not in a way designed to make her panic. Just genuinely. I responded slower. I stopped initiating. I let days pass between conversations without filling the silence. For the first few days, nothing changed on her end. Which, honestly, was its own answer. She didn't notice. Or if she did, she didn't say anything. Which meant either she genuinely wasn't paying close enough attention, or she didn't care enough to address it. Both options pointed in the same direction. By the end of that second week, I had already started mentally removing her from my daily baseline. The emotional slot I'd quietly given her. The part of my brain that had been reserved for thinking about her, missing her, wondering about her. I started filling that space with other things. The gym, which I'd been neglecting. A project at work I'd been half-hearted about. Friends I hadn't seen in a while. And slowly, not all at once, but slowly, I started feeling like myself again. Not the version of myself I'd been becoming around her. The older version. The one that didn't need anyone to validate his presence. 3 weeks after that Saturday in her apartment, I got a text from her. Hey, feels like we haven't really connected in a while. You okay? I stared at that text for a long time. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I was genuinely surprised by how little I felt reading it. A month ago, that text would have lit something up in me, would have made me reach for the phone immediately, would have felt like evidence that she cared. But standing there, reading it at 9:30 on a Tuesday night, I felt nothing particularly urgent. Just a quiet, flat recognition. I replied the next morning. Yeah, all good. Just been busy with some stuff. She said, we should catch up soon. I said, sure, let me know when works for you. And then I put my phone down. and went for a run. The thing about pulling back is that sometimes people don't respond to it at all, and sometimes people respond to it slowly. Like their brain doesn't register the shift immediately, but something in their body starts to notice the temperature change. Brooke was the second type. She started texting more. Not dramatically more, but noticeably more. Random messages in the middle of the day. This place has the best sandwiches, you'd like it. Heard this song and thought of that one conversation we had. Are you free this weekend at all? And every time she reached out, I was polite, friendly, genuinely civil, but no longer warm. I didn't perform distance. I just stopped performing closeness. And the difference was apparently noticeable. Because about 6 weeks after the Saturday I'd heard her in that kitchen, she asked if we could meet up, just to talk. And I said yes. We met at a coffee place near her office. Neutral ground. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a cup. She looked a little tired, or maybe just more thoughtful than usual. I sat down, ordered, made normal conversation. And she looked at me the way people look at something when they're trying to figure out whether it's different or whether they just hadn't been paying attention before. About 20 minutes in, she said, "You've been different lately." I said, "Have I?" She said, "Yeah, you feel farther away." I thought about that. I thought about the right words. And then I said something simple. Something that wasn't cruel, but was completely honest. I said, "I just recalibrated based on what this actually is." She looked at me. "What do you mean?" And I looked back at her, calm and steady, and said, "You told Petra and Simone I was just someone you were passing time with." I heard you, Brooke. That Saturday in your apartment. I heard everything. The silence that followed that sentence was the most honest silence we'd ever shared. She didn't immediately deny it. She didn't launch into an explanation. Her face changed in a very specific way. Not guilt exactly, but something close to it. The expression of someone who didn't think those words would ever come back to them. She started. Stopped. That was. You don't have to explain it, I said. I'm not angry. I'm genuinely not. I just understood after that what I was in this. And I adjusted accordingly. She said, "That's not how I actually feel about you." And I looked at her and said, "Brooke, you said it without thinking," which means it was honest. The things people say when they're not performing for whoever they're talking to, those are the true things. She was quiet. "I didn't mean it the way it sounded," she said eventually. "Maybe not," I said. "But you also didn't say anything to them that suggested otherwise. You laughed. You said it's not going anywhere. That tells me where we actually stand." She leaned forward slightly. "So what does this mean?" And I said, "It means I'm not going to pretend we're building something when you've already decided we're not." She looked genuinely unsettled by that. More unsettled than I had expected. Like she called my bluff and hadn't expected me to actually have cards in my hand. "So that's it," she said. I said, "I'm not storming out. I'm not cutting you off dramatically. But I'm also not going to keep showing up the way I was showing up when that's clearly not what this is." She opened her mouth, closed it, looked down at her cup, and in that moment, I noticed something I hadn't expected to notice. She looked like she was trying to figure out how to say something she hadn't rehearsed. Like she was reaching for words that hadn't been prepared. And I realized, quietly, without satisfaction, that she hadn't thought about losing me. Not really. Not until right now, when it was sitting across from her with a coffee and a calm face, telling her plainly that it was done. We didn't have a blowout fight. We didn't cry. We didn't say anything dramatic. I finished my coffee. She tried, a few more times, to steer the conversation towards some kind of re-engagement. Said maybe she'd said it wrong that day. Said maybe she hadn't been communicating properly. Said maybe we should try to actually talk about what we were. And I listened to all of it. And then I said, very simply, "I don't think I want to have that conversation right now." "When?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. And then I left. And that was essentially the last real conversation we had for a long time. I want to talk about what the next few months actually looked like. Because in stories like this, there's a temptation to skip straight to the redemption arc. To jump from the confrontation to the clean, triumphant aftermath. But the truth is, the months between that coffee shop conversation and the point where I could genuinely say I'd moved on completely were not a straight line. For the first few weeks after that meeting, I still thought about her. Not obsessively, but she was there, in the background, the way a song stays in your head, even when you're not trying to hear it. I'd think about something and instinctively start to formulate how I'd tell her about it. I'd pass the coffee place on the corner where she liked to work on weekends and feel a small pull that didn't mean anything, but wasn't nothing either. I'd hear a voice note tone and have half a second of association before my brain caught up. That stuff is normal. That's not weakness. That's just the human brain catching up to a decision the heart already made. The key thing, the important thing, was that I didn't act on any of it. I didn't text her. I didn't look her up online. I didn't ask our mutual friends about her. I just let the feelings exist without feeding them. And slowly, like a plant you stop watering, they became smaller, less frequent, less loud. By April, something had genuinely shifted. I'd started training for a half marathon I'd been putting off for 2 years. I'd taken on a project at work that kept me genuinely engaged. I started spending more time with Owen and Cole, two of my closest friends, people I'd seen less of when I was caught up in that rhythm with Brooke. Owen is the kind of person who notices when something's different about you before you've said a word. He asked me once, early on, if I was dealing with something. I told him the bare minimum, a connection that ended. He didn't press. He just nodded and said, "Well, you seem okay." And the thing was, I was. Not perfectly. Not in a way that meant nothing had happened. But in the most real sense of that phrase, I was okay. I was present. I was functioning. I was interested in my own life again. And that felt like something worth protecting. I didn't know what was happening on Brooke's end for a while. I wasn't looking. I wasn't asking. I wasn't thinking about it in any sustained way. I only found out because of Simone. And the way it happened was as unexpected as everything else in this story. Simone and I had actually kept in contact, barely, but consistently, through the whole thing. She was the quieter one, the observer. We'd exchanged numbers at some point during the months with Brooke, mostly because we'd ended up in a few group situations, and she'd once lent me a book she thought I'd like. She wasn't close to me, but she was decent. In June, 4 months after the coffee shop conversation, Simone sent me a message. She said she hoped I didn't mind her reaching out. She said she wanted to tell me something, not as gossip, but because she thought I deserved to know. She said, "Brooke talks about you a lot. More than I think she realizes. She's not doing well with how things ended, and I don't know if that matters to you or not. I just thought someone should tell you, since no one else will." I read that message 3 times. Then I put my phone down. Then I picked it back up. And I sat with a very strange feeling. It wasn't triumph. I want to be honest about that. It wasn't the clean, cold satisfaction that people imagine when they picture this moment. It was something closer to sadness. A quiet, low-level sadness for something that could have been entirely different if she'd just been honest. With herself. With me. With the situation. I replied to Simone and said, "Thank you for telling me. I'm genuinely okay. I hope she figures out what she wants." Simone wrote back. She said you were the most consistently present person she'd been with in years. She keeps saying it like she only just realized it. I didn't respond to that one. What Simone told me started filling in pieces I hadn't had access to before. Not because I'd been looking, but because once she opened the door, she shared a little more over the following weeks. Not in a betrayal way. In the way that happens when someone feels like information is owed. Apparently, in the weeks after our coffee shop conversation, Brooke had been waiting for me to come back. Waiting for me to show up the way I always had. For me to call. For me to text something casual and bridge the silence. And when I didn't, when the silence just continued without me rushing to fill it, she apparently didn't know what to do with that. She told Petra she thought I was punishing her. Petra, apparently, said something like, "I mean, what did you expect?" Which I found darkly funny when I heard it. Because Petra had been there. Petra had been in the room. Petra had laughed. And now Petra was the one pointing out that maybe the outcome was predictable. But here's the thing that Simone said that really stuck with me. She said Brooke kept going back to one specific thing. Not the confrontation at the coffee shop. Not my silence afterward. But the part where I'd said, "I just recalibrated based on what this actually is." Apparently that line had stayed with her. She'd repeated it to both of them multiple times. In different conversations. In different moods. Like she was trying to figure out what it meant, or how someone could say something like that without being angry. Like she'd never had someone leave completely without either a door slam or a breakdown. And I thought about that for a while. About how strange it must be to see someone leave quietly, with their dignity intact, without needing you to acknowledge what you did, without needing to win the ending. Just leaving, because they decided they should. I need to tell you something here that I'd been sitting on the whole time. Something I hadn't talked about with anyone. Not Owen, not Cole, not Simone. Before Brooke, there was someone else. Her name was Danny. We'd been together, actually, properly, labeled and defined, for 2.5 years. And the way that ended was nothing like the quiet, self-possessed way I walked away from Brooke. With Danny, I stayed too long. I chased the version of her I'd fallen for even as she became someone different. I apologized for things that weren't my fault. I minimized my own needs until I could barely remember what they were. I watched her gradually treat our relationship as an obligation rather than a choice, and I kept trying to fix things that she'd already stopped caring about fixing. When it finally ended, I spent close to a year just trying to understand what had happened, trying to understand how I'd allowed myself to shrink like that, trying to get back to baseline. The thing about that experience, the thing it left in me, was a quiet, firm decision. I made a promise to myself that I would never again make myself smaller to stay in something that didn't value me, that I would never again stay past the point where I knew the truth, that the moment I had clear evidence that I was not valued, not just undervalued, but actively unvalued, I would leave, cleanly, without a performance, without needing the other person to understand or apologize or change. Just leave. So when I heard Brooke in that kitchen, what was underneath my calm was not some cultivated emotional intelligence. It was Danny. It was every month I'd wasted staying in something past its expiry date. It was the version of myself I'd spent a year rebuilding. And I was not willing to dismantle him again for anyone. Not even for someone who made good voice notes and had a laugh I genuinely loved. By July, I was genuinely happy. Not performed happy. Not distracted happy. Just happy. The half marathon was in August. I was training 4 mornings a week. The work project had led to something bigger that I was genuinely excited about. I'd reconnected with a couple of people I'd drifted from. I was sleeping well. I was eating well. I was reading books I'd been meaning to read for years. My apartment, which I'd let get a little neglected, was clean and organized and felt like mine. And I thought about Brooke the way you think about a chapter in a book you've already finished. It existed. It had happened. It had mattered while it was happening. But the book had moved on. The narrative had kept going. And I was somewhere entirely new. In late July, Simone mentioned that Brooke had asked about me. Specifically, had asked if Simone was still in touch with me. Had asked, with what Simone described as a casualness that wasn't very casual, whether I was seeing anyone. I laughed a little when I read that. Not meanly, just with recognition. That specific kind of question, the one wrapped in fake lightness, is the kind you only ask when the answer actually matters to you. I told Simone to tell her whatever she wanted. That I was doing well. That there was nothing dramatic to report. Simone said, "She's going to ask if she can reach out to you." I said, "I know." Simone said, "Is that okay?" And I sat with that question. Genuinely. Not performing consideration. Actually thinking. And I said, "Sure. But I don't think it's going to go the way she thinks it will." Brooke texted me on a Thursday in early August. I was 3 miles into a training run when the notification came through. I finished the run. Stretched. Showered. Made coffee. And then I sat down and opened the message. It was longer than I expected. But the core of it was this. She said she'd been thinking about what happened between us, specifically about what I'd said in the coffee shop, and she wanted me to know she'd been wrong. She said she'd been scared of how much she actually liked me. She said the comment she'd made to her friends was a defense mechanism, not a truth statement. She said she knew she should have said all of this months ago, but she'd convinced herself I'd come back, and when I didn't, she realized she'd been waiting for something she'd already walked away from. She asked if there was any chance we could talk. I read it twice. And then I noticed what I was feeling. Not a lot. Some compassion. Some recognition. A little tiredness. Nothing that looked like wanting to go back. I want to be fair to her here. Because she's not a villain in this story. She's a person who handled something badly and is now living with that. The fear she described. The kind where you actually like someone so you instinctively minimize them to protect yourself. I understood that. I'd seen it before. I'd even done something like it once, years ago, when I was younger and didn't know yet that the things you run from are the things that chase you. She was not cruel. She was not malicious. She was just careless. And careless, when it comes to people, has consequences. What she'd said that Saturday had not been a lie she told to hurt me. It was a lie she was telling herself. That I wasn't serious. That this wasn't going anywhere. That she was in control of her own heart. And what happened over the following months, apparently, was that her own heart called her bluff. But I couldn't be the one to show up for that particular awakening. Not because I didn't care, but because I was already somewhere else entirely. I replied to her message the next day. I kept it short, and I stood there on the other side of that finish line with my hands on my knees, breathing hard, and I felt something that I'm not sure I have the exact right words for. Not happiness exactly. Something fuller than that. Something that came from having done a hard thing the hard way. From having showed up for yourself when no one required it. From being, simply and completely, the main character of your own life. I looked at Owen and Cole holding that terrible sign, and I laughed until my ribs hurt. A few weeks later, I had dinner with Simone. Not romantically, just two people who'd ended up on the edges of the same story and had somehow become decent to each other through it. She asked me over dessert if I had any regrets. About how I'd handled it. About leaving the way I did. About not trying harder to work it out. I thought about that. Really thought about it. And I said, I regret that it happened the way it did. I don't regret my response to it. Simone nodded. She said, for what it's worth, I think you handled it better than most people would have. I said, I had practice. She smiled at that. And then she said something that I've thought about more than once since that evening. She said, she's going to remember you as the one who didn't fight for her. And I said, I know. She looked at me. Doesn't that bother you? And I said, completely honestly, no. Because I know what I actually did. I fought for myself. That's the only fight that was ever mine to win. I want to tell you what I actually think about this whole thing now. Because I don't want this to be a story that teaches some clean lesson about making someone regret you. Or about winning a breakup. Or about being the one who got out and came out ahead. That framing misses the point. The point isn't her regret. The point isn't my piece as a trophy. The point, the actual point, is this. There was a version of me, a few years before this, who would have heard those words in that kitchen and swallowed them. Who would have kept showing up. Who would have told himself it was fine. Who would have convinced himself that if he just loved better or more or differently, she'd start seeing him the way he deserved to be seen. I know that guy. I was that guy. And the work I'd done in the years between Danny and Brooke, the quiet, unglamorous, deeply unsexy work of understanding my own worth, is the only reason I was able to stand in that kitchen, hear the truth, and decide what to do about it. Not out of anger, not out of pride, out of clarity, out of the simple, stubborn knowledge that I was not a placeholder. I was not a way to pass time. I was not someone to be kept in a category labeled temporary while she figured out what she actually wanted. And if she could not see that, if she had decided, for whatever reason, that I was not worth the full weight of her attention, then the most self-respecting thing I could do was agree with her. And go. It's December now. Roughly 10 months since that Saturday in her apartment. I run 4 times a week. The work project turned into a promotion I'm still quietly stunned about. Owen got engaged to his girlfriend and asked me to be a groomsman, which I accepted with approximately zero emotional composure. I've been on a few dates. Nothing serious yet, but something that feels different from before. Not desperate. Not hopeful in a way that's indistinguishable from anxiety. Just open. Available. Present to whatever comes without needing it to arrive on a specific schedule. I don't know what Brooke is doing. I genuinely don't. I have no ill will toward her. I hope she's working through whatever made it easier to minimize me than to admit she liked me. I hope she finds something real. I hope she doesn't repeat the same mistake with whoever comes next. But those hopes are the kind you carry without tracking. The kind that exist in the background of a life that's already moved forward. The last thing I'll say is this. People talk a lot about making someone regret leaving. About glowing up after a breakup. About becoming someone the person who underestimated you can look back at and feel the weight of what they gave up. And sure, if that's how it lands, fine. But that was never the goal. The goal was simpler and harder. The goal was to be someone who couldn't be treated as temporary. Not to prove it to her. To prove it to myself. The goal was to be so clearly, so solidly, so unshakably in my own corner that when someone decided I wasn't worth the full version of their heart, I could look at them calmly and say, with no drama, no tears, no weeks of begging or bargaining, okay, I believe you. Good luck. And then walk away. And mean it. She told everyone I was just temporary in her life. Nothing serious. Not worth the full investment. Not someone she saw a future with. Just a comfortable, convenient, forgettable detour. And you know what? She was right. Because the version of me she got, the one she chose to mishandle, to minimize, to describe to her friends with that easy laugh, that version was temporary. He left. He closed the door. He moved forward without looking back. And the person standing on the other side of all of it, the one running half marathons and sleeping soundly and building something real, that person isn't temporary anywhere. He just isn't available to her.